So we'll begin with our chanting of the three refuges like we normally do. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Feeling grateful we can settle in together as a community, all of us here in the room, all of you at home on Zoom, sitting together. And we have this human birthright, this natural capacity of every mind, every heart to unify or shed the ill effects of distractedness, to gather in the present moment. It's a kind of subtle, deeper healing of the heart and mind, what we call samadhi, this fourth of the 5 spiritual faculties that we're studying now. And it isn't anything that you or I can make happen, and it isn't actually something that we get or somebody gets. It's simply the natural result of this wise effort to connect with the present moment or to remember that this is being known, and to keep remembering that this is being known, being felt. So in that sense, the proximate cause, the natural cause for samadhi, the stability of awareness, this unification or gathering of the mind, the natural cause is the continuity of present moment awareness. And that's true whether we're training with a very particular meditation object, or we're simply moment by moment aware of whatever it is that's predominant. But it's the continuity of present moment awareness that naturally supports this unification, this healing, this non-distractedness, and the inner pleasure of that whole or full, stable heart. So instead of us cultivating an aversive relationship to our thinking mind and all of the habits of distractedness, the more skillful way is just to choose to be interested. We're interested in remembering that this is being known. And it can be helpful for many of us to use a more specific meditation object for a period of time as a support. So we're remembering, for example, that breathing in is being known. And then we're remembering that the sensations of breathing out are being felt, being known. And on and on. So we can use a meditation object to help build some momentum and this remembering to recognize the present moment. Because the mind knows that recognizing the present moment means connecting and sustaining with the meditation object. But even when we're using a more exclusive attention, other objects will become predominant and the attention will go there. So those so-called distractions then need to be recognized as something being known. Oh, thinking, planning mind is being known. Or doubt is being known. Or the calmness of the mind and body is being felt, being known. So whenever some strong experience comes into the forefront, whether one likes it or not, the attention is going to go there. It's going to notice that. So the practice is to recognize that this is being known now. Not the meditation object, but this other experience is being known or being felt. Now it's like this. Well, can this be okay, that it's being known? Yeah, it can be okay. And we can always return back to the training object, the meditation object that we've chosen, like feeling the breath coming in, feeling the sensations of the breath going out. So let's continue in silence for a while, just seeing if what the Buddha taught is actually true, that the continuity of mindful awareness leads naturally to the stability of present moment awareness, what we call samadhi, which is a kind of healing that can be felt, sensed as a fullness and a stability and an inner pleasure, contented pleasure of the heart and mind. So we're practicing not giving up. So no matter how many times that the mind is drawn back into thoughts about this and that, eventually wisdom knows that the mind is thinking. And that's an important moment not to fall into habits of judgment or doubt. It is the very nature of this part of the mind to think. And the thinking itself is not a problem. The problem is the misunderstanding, like thinking I'm bad because I'm thinking. So that attitude of judgment is what causes tension in the body and mind, not the thoughts themselves. So just be aware, oh yeah, the mind's been thinking. This is how it feels energetically here in the body. If it's appropriate, come back to your training object, the meditation object, and be aware, for example, of the breath coming in. And we're recognizing that it's being known, those sensations of breathing in. And there's no doubt in that moment, feeling the air touching the nostrils or feeling the abdomen and chest expanding with the in-breath. Those sensations, that felt sense of movement in the abdominal wall, there's no doubt there. It's very clear this is something being known here and now in the present moment. Feels like this. And we're learning about what wise effort allows for the connecting and sustaining, the building, the momentum of this continuity of present moment awareness, which is really just a not forgetting the present moment, or not forgetting to recognize that this is being known. Remembering, of course, it's not complicated. Doesn't mean it's easy, but it's not complicated. And noticing the pleasure of this momentum. It's a subtle but very real inner pleasure, kind of fullness, the mind immune from the usual torments, what pushes the heart, squeezes the heart. And it's the pleasure of samadhi, this inner pleasure, that really helps to stabilize and creates an inner feedback loop that allows the samadhi to have some momentum, some stability. And the last comment, that it's more about the recognition that the present moment is being known than it is about the specific characteristics of the experience that's being known. But that it's being known, here and now. That's what makes or supports the stability. And when you feel ready, just adjust the body. Stretch a little if you want, whatever your body might need. And again, welcome everyone. And Kevin, you can turn the sconces on all the way there. That's the bottom to the left. Yeah, and maybe just a little brighter, the overhead ones. So again, welcome everyone. Tonight is week 6 of our 8-week summer class on the 5 spiritual faculties. And we're reflecting on Samadhi, the fourth of the faculties, the 5 faculties. So we have faith or confidence, and this is the confidence that there's something to do with our mind. It's the real alternative to what our mind is sort of conditioned to do, which is to look for pleasant experience. And again, this isn't unwholesome. This is just what our mind is conditioned to do, to look for safety, look for belonging, look for shelter and comfort and all those things. And the opposite, to look to get away from feeling vulnerable, right? Or feeling not liked, and all those things that strike us as being unpleasant. So that's basically what our mind is going to be tuned into. And then the reason that we make a point of faith, it's this confidence that there's something else we can do. We don't have to stop being interested. We're not going to stop being interested in having more pleasant, safe, comfortable conditions and avoiding the difficult conditions. But on top of that, because what arises for us when we pay attention is that's a limited pursuit. However good or fortunate we are in our pursuit of that well-being or happiness based on having nice conditions, we know that it's tenuous and it's never done. So when we stumble upon something else to do with this life that makes sense, initially it's just maybe even on that intellectual level, it just makes sense. This is definitely worth checking out. But that is the initial faith. There's something here to check out, something else that might be really relevant to do with my life. And that leads to the willingness of the mind to apply itself in that direction. How can I check this out to see if this confidence is really something to pursue, something that will pay off, something that will really address the release that the heart intuits is possible, the freedom from affliction. So the mind applies, it begins just a simple understanding of cause and effect from our lived experience, because the whole path, spiritual path, it has this integrity where the ends and means align. So if we intuit that there might be this possibility of being human without my heart being bound up with fear or anxiety or sense of longing or whatever the quality of that being bound up feels like for us, then that intuition of release, my heart not bound up with fear, right? Then that application, that effort we make, we realize that, oh yeah, there's some efforts, like to strive to get it, to get the gold, that has the flavor of being bound up, not the flavor of release. So we learn, oh, maybe that's not the way. Because of this integrity where the means, the way we make effort, has to have the flavor of what our heart has faith might be possible. Initially it's faith that it might be possible. Then, hopefully, with more experience, the confidence is much stronger. No, this is possible. I have realized moments of real release, peace, freedom, an out-of-the-box freedom, like a happiness that's not like other happiness. In Buddhism we call that unconditioned. It wasn't a happiness that arose because the conditions were really nice. It's a happiness that arose because the mind, the way the mind was understanding or relating, led to that release. And see, that makes it unconditioned because the mind there isn't any moment where the mind can't be relating with that wisdom. And remember I said, I forget who I read that said this, but it's a nice way to understand the 5 spiritual faculties. It's really that natural process of a mind going from being inspired, that there's some freedom that the heart can seek that will deliver, to that realization of that release or that peace or that understanding. So how does the mind go from inspiration to freedom, to the release, the wisdom release, we say sometimes in Buddhism, or the release that comes from understanding? How does that happen? And then the 3 factors are, well, it's that wise effort around being present and stabilizing that present moment awareness. That is, in a sense, the engine. And when there is that wise effort to be awake, to be intimate, to be present, and it's stabilized, some momentum or some continuity builds, so it becomes, awareness then becomes quite powerful when there's continuity. It really is felt, sensed as an exponential, if you remember, exponential means that you get a few moments of being present and it feels solid. And then you get, 10, 30 seconds of being present, and it's like, it's not a linear function, it's like a lot more powerful. And then if you get some real continuity going where it's persisting through the day or persisting for hours, that it's like the stability, the example Joseph Goldstein, one of my teachers, uses is, normally our mind is like a really smooth, well-rounded, but upside down bowl. And our practice is you put a marble on this perfectly round bowl that's upside down, and you try really hard to get it right there in the middle of the bowl, but it immediately rolls off under the table, in some corner. You eventually find the marble, and you carefully place it right down, but it immediately rolls off. And when this integrity from the wise effort and the understanding of what it means to be present, so that the continuity of mindful awareness, present moment awareness, can build some momentum, then it's like flipping the bowl. Still, things will arise that will trigger reactivity, but now the marble, it rolls within the bowl, and its natural, effortless tendency is to come back to center. Come back to, oh yeah, it's just this being known. And you'll sense that there's a felt sense of that flip from a mind that basically is sliding into distraction. You bring it back and it slides into distraction, right? This is often, for a long time in our practice, common in our sits and in our daily life practice, where we do have the inclination to come back to the present moment, and to whatever degree we sustain that present moment awareness, we'll just notice the slide into distraction, as opposed to finding ourselves distracted where we didn't even see that movement. With some practice, we start to notice the bait and notice the mind grabbing the bait and getting lost in distraction, as opposed to a very quick moment of awareness, present moment awareness, and then 15 minutes later realizing, oh, I've been lost in thought for 15 minutes, and then stabilizing and cultivating the right intention and having a moment or two of being present, and then 10 minutes later realizing, oh, I don't know how, but I did lose it. I lost the thread of present moment awareness, but now I realize that I lost the thread of present moment awareness. So there's all the way along, like initially, we're just tasting that ephemeral moment of being present. And mostly what we're noticing in that where we're just having a moment or a couple moments of being present is we're noticing the residual tension, squeeze, from not having been present, right? So it's a little bit like, and then there's a moment of presence, and in that moment, which, just literally a couple seconds, there's a sense of what was bound up. It still hurts because it's bound up, but there's just a not adding to the tension and a beginning of relaxation of that inner tension, that inner grip, that inner squeeze, before the mind loses it again. But when it flips, then there's a more pervasive, embodied sense. So it's not just, it's really a felt sense. Sometimes I like to use the word held, H-E-L-D, for samadhi, the beginning of samadhi, because there is a sense of confidence in the present moment. And a felt sense of not needing the mind, heart, and body even, not needing to go anywhere, not needing things to be different. So that's why more and more, we either don't translate the word samadhi, or we don't use the common translation of concentration, but we'll use the word stability, steadiness, unification, a gathered mind, a non-fragmented mind, right? To help create a sense of that, a felt sense of what that is. And so that's really the transition, tonight we're really looking at, what is the natural transition from effort to sati, awareness, present moment awareness, mindfulness, to samadhi, the stability, right? And it's a natural process, right? And a lot of the effort we make initially is just understanding what qualities of mind have that flavor or in the direction of awareness and the stability of awareness, and what qualities of mind aren't. And starving the ones, not identifying or strengthening the qualities of mind that aren't helpful, and keeping in mind and strengthening the qualities of mind that are helpful, right? And so, because there are a lot of things the mind can do in any moment, but not all of them or many of them are going to be conducive to this intention to recognize awareness and to keep recognizing present moment awareness. We're keeping the present moment in mind. It's a practice of not forgetting. And then part of that not forgetting is seeing that movement from wise effort to sati, mindfulness, to samadhi, that stability of awareness, and really trusting that subtle pleasure of fullness, being held in the confidence, almost like the heart belongs right in the middle of this moment. Doesn't need a different moment to belong, to be present. And there's a sense of completeness, like when I say not needing the moment to be different, that's in a sense the subtle pleasure we begin to feel is the absence of that deeply embedded tendency to think there's somebody who needs something, needs to get rid of something, needs to have more of something. There's in our normal psychological dynamic in our mind-heart, right? There's the sort of fundamental characteristic of our mind, or the activity of our mind, is restlessness, right? And then the restlessness has different qualities, like it's a restlessness around, that is animated by greed, or it's a restlessness that's animated by fear or aversion or hate or something. But its underlying nature is just being uneasy or restless, not settled, not stable, not solid or held. So that's why it has a different sense, a different felt sense, samadhi. Because it's the normal, pervasive, almost always there restlessness is less there. And that's felt. And even when you have a so-called good sit, there'll be a sense of not wanting to move. One of the things, like in Zen retreats, they're called sesshins, you'll sit, and then you have a short walking period. They'll ring the bell, everyone gets up and walks. Because a lot of the way that we practice in insight meditation, if you want to continue sitting, you do. It's okay to sit during a walking period, generally on retreats. But in some styles of practice, they want you to walk because they want people to see the attachment to not, this is samadhi, I like this, I don't want to move. And there can be this sort of preciousness around the wholesomeness, the pleasure of samadhi. And I'll talk about that maybe a little later if we have time. The sort of shadow of samadhi, which is just, the unavoidable identification with the spiritual goodies. As I don't know if all of you read the article that is in our resources called Got Attitude that Steve Armstrong wrote. So you can check it out. It's in the email. And he has, he's talking about the 5 spiritual faculties. So he has a little paragraph or 2 on samadhi, on concentration. And he talks about the shadow of the spiritual goodies, where when that samadhi gets strong, it's quite natural for the mind to think, this is it. Whatever nirvana is, whatever freedom is, this is it. And the reason the mind has so much confidence that this is it is because it feels really nice. And it in a sense, it isn't it, in the sense of the mind is experiencing something that it hasn't experienced before, or hasn't experienced often, or hasn't experienced as deeply. That inner peace, that inner well-being that comes. In a way, samadhi is technically defined as the absence of those qualities of mind that hinder or fragment or interrupt the wholeness or the fullness of the mind. So when there isn't any mental activity that's dividing the mind, then the mind appears undivided. And the mind is always sort of in the push-pull. I could do that, and then, it's like we think something, and then we scold ourselves for thinking that, and then we think it again. There's always this sort of, I could do this, I could do that. There's this uneven, divided, restless, one thought evokes a couple more thoughts, those thoughts evoke more thoughts, and it has a never-ending quality to it, right? And so when that dissipates because of the supporting causes for samadhi, which is the continuity of present moment awareness. And remember, when we're present, when we have present moment awareness, that moment, those moments of present moment awareness, it doesn't depend on that cognitive part of the mind defining what's happening. On that level, that so-called intellectual level, we don't need to know what we're doing. That's why a child can have awareness and even continuity of awareness. That doesn't mean they know what they're doing in terms of the practice, but they can children stumble upon these, and probably mammals, other animals can have some kind of samadhi experience where the mind is undivided by greed, hatred, and delusion, by the forces that that lead to and are restless. You see that sometimes, just that natural samadhi when you see a wild animal. And initially there's some heightened, like, are you a threat? Have you had that experience like with the deer? And then they'll look at you, and being a Buddhist, you do your metta thing, like that inward sense, like, in no way do I want to cause you harm, and then all of a sudden, it's like that heightened attention. It's like, oh, the stress of that heightened attention. Should I bolt or not? This sort of, I'm not going to bolt. Right? And you just get the sense of like that mind. We don't really know. I don't really know, but that mind's not bothering with anything extra. And that's the same with our mind, right? When we have a continuity of awareness, if there's enough sustained continuity, then it will become apparent to our mind what it feels like when it's undivided. And then being aware of that wholesome inner feeling, that pleasurable feeling, then actually helps really strengthen the momentum, builds the momentum. Oh yeah, this is a trustworthy pleasure. Some of you know this very famous story the Buddha told while he was a teacher, but it recounts of time when he was a young child, and also a time when he was, I guess you could say, frustrated with his practice, because he had been doing a lot of ascetic practices, fasting and breath control stuff, and and other kinds of, because it was, I think still to some degree, but back then evidently a big deal for these wandering spiritual types to do these, some of them quite strange, ascetic practices. And the Buddha, not to be outdone, did them too, to the nth degree evidently, at least as it's reported in the tradition. And then he had a kind of vision of himself as a 5-year-old child, pretty young, where he stumbled into a natural samadhi, like the first jhana, I think it was called, where greed, hatred, and delusion are not active in the mind. They're not uprooted from the mind. They're still there as a latent tendency, but not actively dividing, disturbing the mind. And so here's the Buddha, having done a lot of ascetic practices, pretty emaciated, not very healthy, having some doubt about whether the way he's been practicing is leading anywhere wholesome. And then he has this remembering, and then the wisdom in his mind wonders, could that pleasure that I experienced be sort of a necessary, wholesome ingredient to the way forward? And then wisdom answered its own question. Yeah, this is wholesome. You don't need to be afraid. Because what ascetics really understand correctly is the limitations of sense experience. But what they wrongly conclude, well, if sense experience can't deliver lasting happiness, then I'm going to reject sense experience. So I'm not going to eat any more than I need to eat. And I'm not going to, indulge in anything, because the world of sense experience is bad. And the Buddha rejects this. Like, no, that's taking renunciation too far. It's not the sense experience itself that we're renouncing. It's the identification. It's the personalizing sense experience that's the problem. It's subtle, but it's a really important difference. And there's a lot of misunderstanding when people study the Buddhist teachings about this point. Because like even the basic form of sitting meditation, it can seem like we're saying, screw life, screw sense experience. I'm just going to sit there for an hour a day. And then I'm going to go on a retreat once a year, and I'm going to sit there a lot of the day. and prove to all of you other more deluded types that I don't need sense experience. But it's just a misunderstanding, because obviously if anybody has ever sat, it's very much a sense experience. We feel so much. It's like all the emotions that we're usually distracted and can't feel show up. And all the sensations, there's nothing like feeling your body as twisted steel, or all the yucky qualities that can show up, and also the sublime, beautiful qualities that can show up in our sitting practice. So it's definitely a sense experience, but we're simplifying things so we can distill, like, oh, this is an identification, an attachment to my likes and dislikes. That's really important to see. So anyway, the Buddha shifted, and he really understood, in terms of his own practice, the importance of balance, not being afraid of embodiment, of being, having a body and living in a balanced way, respecting the need for health. And because one of the things we'll notice, it's why we practice loving kindness practice too. Because we might feel like we have a lot of concentration, but there's a kind of brittleness to our concentration, to the stillness in the mind. And then if we're lucky, we'll just bump into, whether we're formally sitting or just kind of going about our day, into something that's pleasurable, but doesn't trigger a lot of greed. Like we see something wholesome, a bunny chewing on some grass in the backyard or something like that. And the heart just opens up a little bit. And that opening brings some pleasure to the mind. And that was the missing ingredient. And then the samadhi just drops in. It was like that was the only ingredient that the mind needed to drop into a deeper samadhi. Just a little bit of wholesome sense pleasure, because the mind was sort of like keeping a little distance. Because samadhi isn't a distance, it's an intimacy. Because as long as there's distance, there's aversion, like afraid of contamination. If I'm really feeling, if I'm really awake, if I'm really here, then I'm going to be disturbed. And we have all kinds of skillful means. That's the same thing with the exclusive meditation object, where initially we'll use something very specific, like feeling the touching at the nostrils. And because we can be intimate, we can relearn that it's safe to be intimate with sense experience. But I'm relearning it because I'm really limiting the sense experience that I'm aware of to just feeling the touching at my nostrils. But then, we generally, after we tune into the pleasure of that seclusion, and we really trust the experience of samadhi, then the samadhi will allow it to be more inclusive. We won't be as dependent on the exclusive meditation object. It can be the awareness, and the samadhi can continue with its sensitivity through any of the sense gates, not just that particular physical sensation of breathing in and out, but hearing, thinking, smelling, tasting, other touches in the body. So for our small groups tonight, and then just even more importantly for our homework the next few weeks, because once we understand samadhi, then we're also understanding how it's like whatever the mind isn't seeing clearly, whatever mysteries remain mysterious to our mind. Samadhi causes the illumination of whatever remains not understood, not seen. So it isn't like we have to personally try to figure out the mysteries. Like, what does the Buddha mean by not self? It isn't something we figure out. It's something that's revealed when a mind has that stability of awareness. Because it's just the nature of things. It's not something that somebody figures out. So what we want to, like for homework and even in sharing, just sort of in hindsight, scanning through all of our sits that we've had and all of our daily life experiences that we've had, what experiences have we had of that kind of seclusion, that kind of unification where the mind, the heart, felt withdrawn, not from the world. See, we think of seclusion as being withdrawn from the world, but it's really the world of greed, hatred, and delusion that it has distance from. It's the dividing qualities of the mind not being there that makes the mind have samadhi. So when have you had that experience where your mind was operating, whether it was in a formal sitting time or just time with interacting with other people or walking through the woods or whatever it was? Because there's really two things. It's the mind that in those moments is not affected, not colored, let's say, by greed and all of its different manifestations, aversion, and all of its different manifestations like fear and delusion and distractedness and denial, right? So when have we had that experience and then recognize the uniqueness of that experience, right? So we need to be aware that the mind is not divided, right? Because the whole point of samadhi is to recognize, oh, this is onward leading. Somebody, I think, sent an email asking, what do you mean by onward leading? And it's something we say in the Buddhist tradition. And this is a good time to explain it. Like when we recognize samadhi, we realize this is wholesome or healing or pleasurable here and now. And here's the important thing, and it's onward leading. Like there's a sense that not just to indulge in the wholesome pleasure of samadhi, but it has actually a so-called higher purpose. We want to recognize, because it's easy not to recognize it, like just in a sense to indulge in it, because it's pleasurable and healing on that just basic psychological, emotional level. It's very healing. But there's this higher purpose, which is to see things as they are. Because the mind, the effect of samadhi is the mind is profoundly content. So then that's a mind that doesn't have an agenda because it's profoundly content. Right? And a mind that doesn't have an agenda or expectations, that's a mind that sees clearly. We don't realize that our agendas, our expectations, our conditioned habits distorts how we understand experience. So we're not getting to samadhi. That's why I read that or paraphrased that piece from Stephen Armstrong's article, Got Attitude, because when the samadhi is deeper, there's an old adage, nothing ruins a retreat like one good sit. Because we feel like the after effect is, oh, that's it. I just got to keep doing that, having that good sit. And then, of course, already greed is involved and a sense of a self who needs something. And when I get that something, I'm going to be better or better protected or whatever we might think. And that's, on the road to damnation, right? And frustration and a sense of betrayal, like, I thought I had it. Was that real? Then we start to doubt ourselves. Was that experience I had in that sit real? Or did I just make that up? Because my mind is a mess now, because we've been practicing greed, wanting that nice state of mind back. So it's really important to sense the onward leading, because then we understand the point of the samadhi isn't to take it personally and to indulge in what we take as a personal accomplishment, but to realize that this mind, because it's so settled and content, because it doesn't have an agenda, its way of observing or its way of being sensitive is very clear seeing. So the truth of impermanence, the truth of the cause of dukkha, suffering, like getting attached, it just becomes so obvious. Nothing reveals the truth of things like being really peaceful. Because when there's a lot of peace, then anything that has the flavor of disturbance really stands out. Any self-centeredness, because it's the self-view, the self-centeredness that then leads to it activates the forces of greed and aversion. That's sort of the active expression of self-view. There's no greed and aversion without self-view, self-centered view. Greed only arises from a self-perspective, being apart. Hate, aversion, fear only arises from a sense of being separate and apart. So we'll talk more about samadhi and how samadhi, but you get the sense just from what I've said, how it just naturally supports the deepening of wisdom and the deepening sense of freedom, like what freedom is, how it arises. So we'll leave it here. We'll get ready. And again, so for the small groups, just some reflection on where have you tasted that mind free of greed, hatred, and delusion? What did you sense at the time supported its arising? What supported it going away? How did you ruin it or lose it? What arose in the mind, what qualities kept the mind from finding it again or getting back to that way of being? And also the kind of doubt, I mentioned betrayal, but just talking in your small groups or just reflecting at home on your own about your own doubt about samadhi. Like, maybe some people get these beautiful, wholesome states of mind, but I've got a broken mind, I got a raw deal when the Buddha or God or whatever, nature was delivering minds, and it's not fair, but I guess it's the way it is. Or I'll do it later, some putting it off. I'll get interested in it later. I do believe in it, but not now. Or it's like we're just really gung-ho, thinking that willpower or just blunt effort is going to get me there, or just whatever. Because you probably have had a number of different kinds of attitudes about samadhi. It's generally, for most of us, triggering. Because it's sort of, like using that term again, spiritual goody, it's the glittery object that Buddhists want. Because it's like real proof that what the Buddha was talking about, that it delivers. Right? It's like, this mind state is out of the box. This is not my normal mind state, and it's good. And I want more of it. Right? And it makes, because it has a sense of power, it also really, whatever ego is operating in those moments and afterward, it really inflates the ego. It's like, I don't think anybody in this room has had this kind of samadhi that I've had. Because it feels so special So the mind, it just, those tendencies, already to have great doubt and to have great self-inflation, they just get activated by our relationship to samadhi. So that would be a really good, useful thing to normalize in your small group conversations. And remember to treat these groups as a sacred time to be together, to learn from each other. Each person gets 2 to 3 minutes to share. Then there should be 5 to 10 minutes for just open discussion. Share your names. You can share your pronouns at the beginning. Take some time to thank each other at the end and to say good night. And I'm not sure if Dave, this may be the week that Dave is not available. Oh, Dave's here tonight. Okay, good. Dave, I'll make you host. And Dave, would you shut off? I forgot to shut off the YouTube.